Chapter 15. De Cruz. He didn't recognize the woman sitting at his assistant's desk. "Excuse me, who are you?" Standing up, the woman extended a slender copper hand.
Adelina Flora Bella de la Cruz. Pleasure to meet you.
Hawk was stunned. This was the last place he expected to see a woman as gorgeous as this. He hoped his appreciation didn't show. When she'd said her name, it was almost as if she were singing. Her voice sounded like warm honey poured over sweet peppers. She had invasive amber eyes that blasted through a man's defenses like a blowtorch through cotton candy. "The pleasure's mine, Miss de la Cruz." He hoped his tone was measured.
Please, call me Adelina.
"Where's Mr. Lewis, Miss de la Cruz?" Her dark gray dress was modest enough in design, but its soft woven fabric clung to her contours like melted cheese to a chili dog. Hawk struggled to maintain strict eye contact. Even though her outward manner was strictly professional, there was nothing she could do about her underlying sensuality. She wasn't trying to be sexy. It was effortless.
Mr. Lewis took emergency leave, sir. Personal matter. I was told you'd been notified.
Hawk wondered if anybody had called last night that he'd forgotten about. He asked who hired her. She said HR had assigned her, but Dink Carlson had been her reference. Hawk's defenses sparked. Was Carlson trying to sick this woman on him? "Get me Regional Director Walters at Lompoc." As he walked away, almost as an afterthought, he offered, "Welcome aboard." The modular bungalow was situated on site for efficiency purposes. Staff were holdovers from the previous administration, and he hoped this new addition didn't upset the work dynamic. He'd moved himself on site ostensibly to show he'd go to extremes to complete his orders, but the deeper truth was, he simply wasn't comfortable in D.C. Whenever he'd entered the Bureau's First Street headquarters, he'd felt like a display mannequin. Worse, he sensed mockery behind his back. It wasn't that he couldn't handle pressure. He'd led combat fighter squadrons after all. But this duty was different. Rather than feel like a fish in a bowl, he chose to hide in plain sight where he could still get the job done. He knew staffers at the DOC as well as the BOP thought he was weird. What kind of cabinet member makes themselves an outcast? But what they thought didn't matter. His goal was to finish the job and get out of here. Hawk ordered Regional Director Walters to search for Dennis's family in every detention center. When he'd finished the call, he dug through his pockets and fished out the paper Dennis had written on. He ordered De La Cruz to contact the Assistant Director of Correctional Programs. Tell him to search all privately owned California immigration detention centers. He handed her the paper. "Get that to legal. Have them draft writs of habeas corpus for those names." As De La Cruz hurried away, he called after her. "And call Enterprise. Have them come pick up their car." While he waited for a response from the AD of Prison Programs, Hawk distracted himself with product management reports. MTC staff had handled all the details in the stack of files on his desk. He was looking at the pile when a farm equipment order inside a mound of recent Carlson-approved purchase orders caught his eye. There's enough hardware here to cultivate an entire state, he thought. On a hunch, he began searching the camp survey map. Before he knew it, it was 5 o'clock. Still no word from Lompoc, but Dennis had called 3 times. Hawk had De La Cruz call Walters back. A few minutes passed before she ducked her head back in.
Director Walters is gone for the day, sir. His office says they're still waiting to hear from a couple of facilities, but so far, no trace of your people.
He couldn't hide his frustration. "What about what's-his-name over at Correctional Programs?"
Hector Hernandez, sir.
Her voice betrayed a hint of irritation that he didn't remember the Hispanic officer's name.
His office says that none of their facilities have them either.
Well, somebody's got them. Check everything in the county that has bars. I'm talking city jails and juvenile housings too. Find them.
If you don't mind my asking, sir, do you know them? Who are these people?
Hawk couldn't let on that any of this was personal. Just some people who have been mistakenly detained. I'm trying to keep a lid on Hispanic deportation mismanagement.
Are they good candidates to represent a test civil case?
The question made him suspicious. People in jobs like hers generally didn't care about immigrants, even if they were immigrants themselves. When Hawk asked why she cared, the temperature dropped in her eyes.
I think we all care about justice, sir.
I agree, he thought, but said instead, I should think we would too, Miss Dela Cruz. But henceforth I would appreciate your not involving yourself with matters into which you have not been invited. It stung, but she didn't show it.
Yes, sir.
Turning on her heels, she dismissed herself. His eyes followed her out of the room. You fine, he thought, but you ain't that fine. But really, he knew she was. Eventually, he stopped taking Dennis's calls and let them go straight to voicemail. Days turned to weeks and Dennis stopped calling. Then, without any national or international outcry, cities like Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Monroe, Louisiana, Fort Pierce, Florida, became virtual internment camps. Everhart had wanted to go so far as to propose a constitutional amendment excluding blacks and Hispanics from the Bill of Rights, but Galori managed to keep him from it. The restraining of the president notwithstanding, the administration's labor aspirations remained intact. Hawk's suspicions about the farm equipment were confirmed when tons of Carlson-ordered seed showed up at the camp's far-flung fields. "Those were my orders," Carlson replied when Hawk asked him about it. "You got issues? Take them up with Everhart." Across the country, detention camps were filling up faster than the Bureau's ability to expand. It wasn't long before immigration detention centers, private camps, and all federal camp installations in the California system were linked by rail. Carlson had planned to position foundries and factories at the center of the development, while reserving the vast outlying acreage for agriculture. From the looks of things, there'd be plenty of hands available for the anticipated work ahead. With the administration's encouragement, party-controlled city councils issued ordinances mandating barricades if 3 or more residents were charged with sedition. Kellogg had coerced city councils into requesting the interventions. That way, Everhart could claim the government wasn't initiating isolations, but rather was responding to petitions for assistance from the cities themselves. The result was that millions of people continued to flee west, where they hoped for far more lenient state governments. From New Mexico to Washington, states took on a completely new complexion. Yet, predictably, arrests in those places went up in direct proportion to the increase in migration. Economic pressures, brought on by the increase in population influxes, quickly pushed affected state budgets past their breaking points. Frustrated by the federal government's withholding of social program funding and entitlement payments, several states threatened secession. In the wake of strained resources, the barter system took hold in many of the shanty communities that popped up like mushrooms across the new frontier. People began organically helping each other survive. Free towns, as they came to be called, took on the feel of 1960s hippie communes. Hawk was considering handing in his resignation when he received a strange dictum from the administration. Everhart directed him to issue an edict to all federal correctional facilities, to wit, any prisoner who dies in the custody of, or while otherwise incarcerated by, a federal correctional officer or institution will be buried at the place of death or some other federally approved facility. Relatives will have no claim to the body. He wasn't sure why, but he took it as a sign to stay put. Dela Cruz cradled a manila folder under her arm as she leaned against the door jamb. Without looking up, Hawk asked her what she needed. He knew she was there by the scent of the perfume. It had the fragrance of lilac that for some reason put him in the mind of jacaranda trees. She tried and failed to conceal her annoyance that he hadn't bothered to make eye contact and said all she wanted was his signature. "Just drop him on the desk, please." She inwardly mocked his ignoring her. She knew as soon as she walked away, he'd be staring at her ass. In the months they'd worked together, never an unprofessional word had passed between them, but every now and then, they did catch the other one looking. On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, Hawk had had his fill of analyzing gradation, water flow, and similar charts. "Budgets, blueprints, and progress reports just ain't who I am," he muttered, while closing out the current spreadsheet. He was questioning his sanity when the news broke. Everhart had ordered Governor Booker to put California's National Guard on alert. Hawk immediately put through a call to Sacramento. The first words out of Booker's mouth surprised him. "I'm not doing it," he'd said without prelude. "Thank God," Hawk exhaled. Everhart can't wait to get into Los Angeles. It's starting to look like a concentration camp. Our line suddenly disconnected. As he sat the receiver down, he noticed Dela Cruz still looming in the doorway. Her ability to materialize out of nowhere was disconcerting. "How long have you been standing there?"
I never left.
He didn't know what to make of her having overheard him naysay the president. Too late now, he thought. Go ahead. Tell your friend Carlson what I said, so Everhart can fire me.
If that's what you think, then why not just fire me instead?
Resting a hand defiantly on her hip, she waited for his response. Huck was stymied by the gauntlet toss. He hadn't expected such a direct reaction. He didn't want to fire her, and he didn't want to address the reasons why. Retreating to his computer, he said the only thing he could think of. That will be all, Miss Dela Cruz.